Republicans love to say that there's no systemic racism in America, yet we continue to see systemic racism in the housing industry. The Biden administration is trying to tackle that. Vice President Kamala Harris on Thursday held a call with various news media outlets talking about these new rules. She announced that financial institutions must ensure that their appraisal algorithms are not biased and do not produce lower valuations for homes owned by people of color. The administration is also releasing guidance to make it easier for consumers to appeal what they suspect to be biased valuations. Harris noted that only about 5% of home appraisers are people of color, and shared the administration hopes to grow through training opportunities for groups underrepresented in the industry. The move is part of an effort to ensure fair algorithms and increase transparency for home valuations. Harris described home ownership as one of the ways for American families to build wealth. Joining us right now is Antoine Thompson, former executive director of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. We'll pull them up later. We pull up my panel right now. Michael Imhotep, host the African History Network show out of Detroit. Matt Manning, civil rights attorney out of Corpus Christi. Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver, political analyst out of National Harbor, Maryland. Matt, I want to start with you. What I did this show with Patrick Bet-David. He claims he's independent, but he's hardcore conservative, out of Florida. And systemic bias came up. I talked about, these home appraisals. And he's like, oh, no, I don't believe that. Well, his team was very slow in pulling the data up. So I said, fine, I'll do it. So I pulled up the New York Times report where the Biden administration detailed, using census data, the racism in home appraisals. I mean, they literally looked at the data and said, okay, what are the appraisals in this census tract compared to this one? And then he tried to say, oh, I don't believe it. I'm like, oh, so I give you the proof and now you don't believe it. Well, this right here is the kind of proof we're talking about. African Americans are being negatively impacted when we talk about these algorithms, and what happens is these folks are appraising the homes of black folks and others at a much lower value, and then what happens is you're trying to resell your home and you can't. If you do, you're selling at a lower price, and so therefore you're not maximizing your profit. That continues to be racism in the housing industry.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And you have to be just completely, blind or have amnesia to not realize that every few years a story comes out, and they're largely anecdotal, but a story comes out about a family who got a bad appraisal. Black family usually gets a bad appraisal, and then they hide their race, and then the appraisal is considerably higher, right? So from just an easy, demonstrable standpoint, you see that this happens because we see stories about it continuously. And we know that it happens, and I'm glad that the Biden administration is addressing this. What I am concerned about, and I'm hoping that your guest will clarify for me, is how they intend to cure the algorithm process. Because what concerns me is if the information that goes in is inherently flawed, then it'll come out with flawed results. And presumably they have some control for that. But that would be my concern. If you're looking at communities that have been historically undervalued, then putting that data in is presumably going to skew the data. But outside of that curative question, I'm glad to hear this because, as we know, home ownership is by far the primary vehicle for not only generational wealth, but for people of all colors to build wealth. So the idea that we are systemically being discriminated against in the values of our homes purely because of race and purely because of, discrimination is a horrible thing and literally takes money out of people's pockets. So I'm glad that the administration sees this as a priority and is addressing it.
And what's interesting here, again, Michael, Republicans want to deny this reality. You can have numerous stories where black homeowners say, oh, white appraiser came in and valued the home at this, and right. Then we took all the black pictures down, we stripped it of all its blackness, and we had some white friends welcome them, and all of a sudden it's valued at $100,000, $200,000, or $300,000 higher. Hello?
Yeah, Roland, I've dealt with people like that. I've been on panels with black conservatives as well, more like grifters, because we've always had black conservatives, but most of the time they made sense historically. We had Craig DeLuce here on this show, and Reese Colbert and I dealt with him from Project 21. So these black conservatives parrot talking points from white conservatives. they cannot admit systemic racism exists. Because if they admit that systemic racism exists, then they will be tasked to provide policies to address systemic racism. They don't have policies to address systemic racism because it's not in the Black conservatives' advantage. It's not in their best interest to address it because the people who are paying them benefit from systemic racism. Racism is systemic by nature. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. So they'll say that they believe that racism exists, but they'll believe racism exists, but they don't believe systemic racism exists. That's a lie. 97% of home appraisers are white. Black conservatives don't want to address that because then they'll be forced to do something about it. So the Biden-Harris administration, actually President Joe Biden back June 1st, 2021, 100th anniversary of the commemoration of the Tulsa Race Massacre, when he was down in Tulsa, he announced initiatives of the Biden-Harris administration to address systemic racism when it comes to home values, things of this nature. Okay, so this is a continuation of this. This is definitely needed. And all those simple Simon asses out there who talk about the Vice President Kamala Harris isn't doing anything, the Biden-Harris administration isn't doing anything, compare this to what Republicans are doing because they don't want to even acknowledge that this problem exists.
Do we have Antoine Thompson there? All right, so we're having some technical issues there. On this front, and again, when we talk about the wealth gap, we talk about the lack of wealth. This right here, Matt, is a perfect example. When our homes are selling for less, $20, $30, $50, $100, $200,000, that's money we can't invest. That's money we can't buy other things.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's especially impactful because it's not some nebulous metric by which discrimination is occurring, right? It puts a dollar value on. We are $100,000 less up essentially than we would be if we sold our house if the appraisal were appropriate. And that's particularly true as we talk in the national zeitgeist about, people in the younger generations on being unable to buy homes. So the idea that families are investing in homes and want the latitude to move once they sell a home and are getting disadvantaged purely because of how they look, and that's taking away from their ability to buy a new home and or to invest, to your point, is especially problematic. And I think it's good in framing the discrimination issue because it's not purely a question of what is the mental anguish worth or what is the emotional toll of this worth. It's literally we are down $200,000 where we should be up $200,000 because of the appraisal. And I think that's helpful for framing the issue and also for people seeing the gravity of the issue, understanding how important home ownership is to the building of wealth.
And I just get a kick out of these people, Michael, who act as if, we're just making these things up and it's really no big deal. But the reality is the one area where most Americans have been able to generate wealth, it is through home ownership. And when you look at African Americans, we've never hit 50% of home ownership in this country. And so even when we do own homes, we still are having to deal with Jim Crow.
Well, absolutely, Roland. And once again, this goes back to my premise. It's not in Republicans' interest to admit that this problem exists, because then they will have to deal with a history of laws and policies that now distributed wealth and power and resources into the hands of Europeans. Right now, the Brookings Institute in the past few years came out with their study that shows that African Americans' homes are valued at $48,000 less than comparable white homes. That accumulates to $156 billion in less value that our homes have. This negatively impacts generational wealth. When you look at the GI Bill, 1944, signed into law by President Roosevelt, the GI Bill is one of those bills in the 20th century that drastically maldistributed wealth, power, and resources, because white veterans were able to get low interest loans to buy homes, go to college, and start businesses, whereas African Americans were disproportionately discriminated when they took advantage of taking advantage of the benefits that, one, we earned by serving in the military, serving in World War II, and two, our taxpayer dollars were paying for. But when you try to address things like this, then you have somebody like a Senator Tim Scott who says that America's not a racist country. And when he made that statement, everybody needs to look at what his next statement was. His next statement was, and I'm paraphrasing, it's wrong to have race-based policies or policies that address that discrimination. He's talking about reparations. He's talking about dealing with things like critical critical race theory, et cetera. Okay, so this is the playbook of Republicans. So we have to understand this and make sure that we vote them out of power and keep them out of power.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.